So when I see this building and I see, the way the light works in it and the way the acoustics work, man, like, brother, one of the things that hit Emerald and I so hard was when they first sang doxology. It's probably like the one thing in the church that everyone can do off the cuff, but it is beautiful, because everyone knows it well and they're singing full throated and loud, but the building helps in that. It's not manipulation.
Yeah.
It's if we're understanding that part of what we're doing in church is joining this heavenly choir, well, you feel like it. And that's true. It is literally happening, even if we don't perceive it.
Welcome to C Square Podcast, where we talk with everyday people about faith and work. My name is John, and if this is your first time tuning in, we just ask that you take a quick moment, subscribe to the channel, like this video, click the bell for notifications, and as we go throughout the conversation, any questions or comments that you have, feel free to drop them below, and we'll get back to you and see how the conversation goes in the comment section. This time, my guest for this episode is the highly anticipated and legendary Paul Zimny. What's up, man?
I'm blown away by that that intro. I don't think anyone's gotten those kind of accolades.
Oh, dude, man. Well, you're my one of the very few guests I've had from out of the great state of Texas, man.
Really?
Just a couple, man. Not too many.
When you say out of, you mean like not currently in Texas, or
not currently? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was like, wait, weren't a lot of your other guests in like West Texas and stuff?
A lot of them are West Texas, Dallas, sure. That kind of thing. I think I had somebody in New Mexico, Indiana, and
yeah, that's right. That's right.
You, man.
No, yeah. But, I mean, was in Texas for about 10 years, from Indiana, but moved to Colorado about a year and a half ago, almost. Yeah, basically as old as my youngest daughter is. So
awesome, man. And Colorado's sounds like it's been good to you. We did a little chatting before we started up, and sounds like y'all are getting settled in, right?
As much as we can. It's always difficult to integrate into a new community, and I mentioned earlier that we handicapped ourselves with not getting certain licensed stuff taken care of in the meantime, as promptly as we could have. So it makes it more difficult than it otherwise would be to engage with that community. But they've been nothing but kind and reached out, picked up the slack, so to speak. But no, I really can't complain, and even an ideal move would be really hard. So,
yeah. So, Emily and I honeymooned in Colorado when we got married almost 12 years ago.
Nice.
It'll be 12 years ago next month.
Awesome.
Wait, is it May or June?
Dude, you're asking. Okay. It is May. It is about to be June. I'm terrible at time.
It's May 31st, so
right. No, that's true.
So in July it'll be 12 years, and so we went to Durango, Colorado, and stuff for our honeymoon. Is it legal to turn left on a red light there?
News to me. News to me. The traffic in Fort Collins. Man, I'm sorry. I forgot that they're. Someone has a birthday party next door. I don't know if you can hear that. I can close the window if needed. She warned us, but
that's an incredible mic you have.
Is it?
Well, yeah, because I heard that, dude. It was in my it was right next to me.
Let me close the window then. I hate to do this. All right.
Don't worry about it.
You let me know. But
yeah,
gosh, what's your question?
So I was in a left turn.
Oh, the left turn.
Yeah.
No, that's definitely news to me. The traffic here, Fort Collins is a grid, so it is just, I don't know, you just turn left on your green lights. I mean, I I don't know, that sounds kind of crazy to me. I don't understand how that would work, but
Yeah, no,
I've never
same
heard
here.
anything like that.
But I was at a red light when we were honeymoon, and I was in left lane. It was a turn lane, and I got honked at obnoxiously by like the 2 or 3 cars behind me.
Really?
And one of them actually moved over into the other lane and crossed the red light and turned left while I was waiting there. And so I was
Wow.
like, I've never been in Colorado before, so I'm like, if y'all could turn left on red, first of all, that's awesome. And like nobody gave me the memo when I picked up the memo.
I'm going to have to ask about that. Now I'm curious. I mean, I know that, I shouldn't say I know, but maybe if it's like a one-way street or something,
Yeah,
maybe that's an exception. But no, I have not encountered anything like that here. Worst thing I've encountered driving wise is just um, college students who don't drive well. They're not good in the rain. They're real good in the snow, but not the rain.
that's fascinating.
Yeah,
I would assume
doesn't rain.
Yeah.
Doesn't rain too much. I forget about it. I say that because everything's so green here, but it's still desert. So
You're in
it just
probably one of the most beautiful states in the country, man.
it is pretty gorgeous.
Yeah.
The mountains here, we don't get like a great view of them, but um, just depending on which roads you are on in town, you can get a better view. Uh, if you are, I always forget the highway number, but if you take the highway down to Denver, you get pretty much a beautiful view almost the entire way. I am the usual driver, so it's harder for me to look at it, but Emerald's always telling me how blown away she is. And even when it gets warmer, at least for now, like there's still snow caps on some of them.
Yes.
They are gorgeous.
Yeah, man. You're talking about the snow caps. So when we were on our honeymoon, we went to do you know where Durango is?
No.
Southwest Colorado.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And so there's another
That
small
would have
town
been my guess, but yeah.
Because I believe Durango is a really huge, like it's a small town with a lot of tourism.
Okay.
Kind of like a Fredericksburg type kind of thing.
Okay.
And so next to it is a less popular town, Silverton, and we did a Jeep tour up into the mountains, and it was one of my favorite things ever because I was in a t-shirt and jeans, comfortable in the mountains, covered in
Yeah.
snow, and when I got out of the Jeep, I was knee deep in snow. And
Yeah.
I just remember like never wanting to leave that moment ever.
Yeah.
And here I am.
No, there is I think one way or another we're going to do what we can to make it happen. Things are a little tight right now, but there is a town here called Ore, which I think it's known as Little Switzerland.
That's where we stayed.
Oh my! Well,
Yeah.
Emerald has wanted to go there. She basically scouted it out before we even moved here, I think, and we didn't make it happen for a number of reasons. But you have to, at least if you want to get like an Airbnb or something, and you don't want to pay a fortune, you have to get it way ahead of time. And if you want to get it at the ideal time of year, you're still paying a lot. But we, it's funny now that you say that. I'm going to make it even more of a point. I know Emerald wants to do it, and I know I would love it.
That's awesome, man.
That's funny. Yeah, it's a bit of a drive, but we got the van. It'll be easy.
Yeah, we flew into Denver and drove from Denver all the way down there. Hindsight being 2020, because I was raised in Central Texas, I probably should have flown into Santa Fe in New Mexico.
Okay.
And just shot over there. But like being from Central Texas, the idea of driving from one state to the other and it being quicker just didn't compute.
No, that's fascinating. I don't know that I would have figured that out either. That's interesting. But even the airport in Denver is like, it's not even in Denver. It's like half an hour east of Denver.
Yeah,
it's a real pain to kind of get to. When people fly in or visit or whatever, I kind of hate going to pick them up, but it's really not all that bad. It's just that with the van, it's a lot of gas.
Yeah.
So but it's not too bad because it gets offset just by the fact that, because everything's so close here, we don't have to drive a whole lot and we save on gas.
Right.
So.
Yeah, but so tell me about the church that y'all just joined a church, right? You became members.
Man, again, I'm bad with timing, but it was probably, I really ought to know the day that my girls got baptized.
You have it written down?
No, but I know it's on Facebook. You know what? I don't. If there is a certificate, we never signed anything, which got me thinking. I can tell you more about that in a bit, but I've actually been wondering, like, wait, do we have like a document that says we're members, that we could get, or a baptism certificate or whatever? I really like that, but I keep forgetting about it. But no, we joined in the same service that our kids got baptized, which was probably, I want to say like 3 or 4 months ago. I'm really bad with time.
3 months ago sounds about right.
Yeah. Well, just for reference, I had thought I was staying with an old pastor of mine for about 5 months, and when I was, applying for a job and had to get the records and everything, I realized it was 11. I was like, wow, I'm not even close. But the church. So Redemption Hill. Coming from a technically non-denominational, but in many ways sort of functionally Reformed Baptist. And when we had left, I was already pretty well convinced and sort of leaning towards paedobaptism.
Just for the people who are watching, man, what does that mean?
Yeah, no, but please, I'm real big on defining terms and such. So, I didn't even know what paedobaptism was until, maybe I was like 25 or something like that. So I grew up in sort of non-denominational setting, Baptist setting. And, Baptists are so called because they are credo Baptists. So they baptize on a creed, on a confession of faith. So, what age they think is appropriate is going to differ between church to church. But, most Baptist churches will, if this person's making a confession of faith, we're going to, maybe ask them some questions and maybe put them through a class or something. It all depends. But once they believe that confession is credible, they will baptize them. Whereas the paedobaptist position, paedo referring to infants, paedobaptists baptize not on a confession of faith, but they have this covenantal understanding in that, because my wife and I are, baptized Christians, any children that we would have would also be baptized into the church. And, it's an endless discussion that goes, incredibly deep, but, I'll say, at least at a sort of surface level, one of the differences there is you sort of, at least my understanding, and my understanding is not very rigid. It's not like I went and read a bunch of books about this. I came at it from a very different sort of roundabout direction. But my sort of understanding of it is that we, it's just one passage. I'm not trying to hang a whole thing on it, but when Scripture says that the children of believers are holy, we sort of, this sort of assumption, we are a Christian family, they're children of this family, thus they are sort of assumed Christians, and we raise them as such. But if they're Christians, they get baptized. So maybe more detail than was required, but But yeah, paedobaptism just means baptism of infants. And so
So
we
would it
baptize
be
the children of adult
right?
believers.
Gotcha. So they're baptized because you and your wife believe.
Yes, we're a member of a
Okay.
church, and um, you know how that breaks down and whatnot. It definitely differs. I could be wrong about this, but I think the Westminster Confession of Faith, which is sort of the premier Presbyterian confession, says that you are in sin if you do not baptize your children. Uh, and my understanding with Anglicans, for example, is that they sort of leave that decision up to the parents. But I don't know much more past that.
Okay. Gotcha.
And those aren't the only
So
two groups that baptize children, but you know, just
no,
using them
right.
as examples.
Yeah, like Methodists baptize, but they sprinkle, and
Yeah, and that's another
yeah,
thing. Mode. Yeah.
right.
Um, but getting back to your original question, I promise not to take too long. No, we joined Grace Presbyterian Church. Um, we spent about a month attending different churches. Uh, you know, we picked this church for a number of reasons. I'll be just out and out. I'm I'm quite conservative, both politically and theologically. And the only way that I was going to get a church that was as quote unquote conservative as I'd like would be if I attended uh, essentially a MacArthur-esque type of Baptist church here, which is not what we wanted. Fine people, I'm
Understandable.
sure, but that's not what we wanted.
Yeah.
And because we knew that we were going, I was leaning in this direction. I wasn't going to pull my wife kicking and screaming or anything, but definitely, once we were attending, at least, we eventually had to sit down with one of the elders who sort of approached us about membership. We had already kind of made our desire known, but we were going through so many difficulties after moving here; it just got put on the back burner. But he made the effort, and once we kind of had a sit down conversation with him, where Emerald got to just ask her questions, because she's asked me questions, but I wanted her to know from the leadership itself and to know the particulars of what this denomination, which is the PCA, believes on this issue, and so she could get something a bit more robust, but also systematic. Uh, and she at least got to the point where she was like, "Well, I'm not totally sure what I think, but I'm not against it. I'm comfortable with it." So once we were at that point, it's like, all right, well, and she's deferring to my leadership as her husband as well. Ultimately, it's my decision, and it's what we went with, and it was a beautiful moment. But no, we joined the church, and uh, one of the things, and I know we're going to get into this, is the building is an old church building.
Yeah.
There's not really any parking. You kind of just park on the street, and it was a church that I think was built like 1890 something, and you can see on the cornerstone of the church, it's like Lutheran something or other, and then you see above the door, and it's like Anglican something or other,
Huh.
and now it's a Presbyterian church, and we don't have how do I put it? We don't have something in glass or stone. We have kind of banners up saying that it's Grace Presbyterian actually, but there are some stained glass windows in there. We have an actual church bell that goes off when we go to church, and to give you an idea of just these different traditions are much more comfortable with things like images of Christ. So there's a stained glass window near the back that is an image of Christ. And I don't know why they have decided to maybe leave it there and not cover it up or whatever. I'm not sure about this particular church's, reasons for doing or not doing whatever. But in a typical Presbyterian church, you would not see that because that's not something they're comfortable with. They would consider that a second Second commandment violation, 2CV.
Yeah, 2CV.
Right. Yeah. So, but it's just this beautiful little building, and that was something that really attracted me to it. I think that architecture and art speak, and it's either going to speak truth or it's going to speak a lie. And I look at this architecture and I'm like, that speaks truth. Now, you could go inside and it could be a dead church.
For sure.
But in this case, I believe it's an alive church. And it's a bit of an interesting situation because the pastor that was the lead pastor when we joined, he was, before COVID, he was the what do you call, like, assistant pastor, and the lead pastor kind of abruptly left. It wasn't a scandal or anything, but we need someone to step up, so he kind of reluctantly did it. Then COVID hits, and it was very, very difficult for them. And they were searching for a new pastor in the last year or so, and once they kind of got a guy, or at least close to finding a guy, he stepped down himself from the leadership altogether. Again, not a scandal or anything, but just guy was burnt out and didn't want that role to begin with. So we actually have a new lead pastor from Houston.
Oh, dang.
But he's a great guy. I've gotten a chance to sit down with him. I'm going to try to do that again this week if I can.
Awesome.
But anyways, I can go on too long answering single questions. I know you have more, but no, I love Grace. They've been nothing but great to us. You have hiccups and stuff, but I've, even in those hiccups, I've seen, I did something wrong. Well, I apologize. Please forgive me. Like, well then, that's the best possible outcome. You'd rather nothing happen to begin with, but if that's the pattern, then that's a great sign.
Yeah. No, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Tell me about why you cared about the building.
Cared about what?
The building, right?
The building.
An old building and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, so I have nothing against, ages of buildings.
Yeah.
You can have beautiful modern things.
Right.
But, and this is me very much as a layman, but I'm not a fan of the Enlightenment. And I think a lot of bad things came out of that. A lot of bad philosophies. The Enlightenment?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the European Enlightenment.
Okay.
I think a lot of bad philosophies and ways of thinking have come out of that, and we're still dealing with to this day in countless ways. But I think one of the things that impacted was art and aesthetics. That's probably the root, so to speak, is aesthetics and beauty.
Okay.
And when I think this is a Greek idea, but it's certainly an old Christian idea as well. This idea of virtues and this understanding of the good, the true, and the beautiful. These things are interconnected and related. Some would argue that they're ultimately the same thing in different kind of facets, so to speak. But and I certainly believe that these things, truth, beauty, and goodness, I believe that they are, at the very least, very deeply intertwined. But truth, okay, that makes sense. Goodness, by definition, sure. But beauty is something that throws people off. A lot of people think that beauty is subjective. I would say probably the majority of our culture thinks that way. I think that taste, these are not things I've thought through immensely, but I think that taste can be a thing. Oh, I prefer this kind of music as opposed to this other kind of music. But I also respect people, and I've said this myself sometimes, who have said, I prefer this, but I think that this is probably objectively better. But they're actually getting at something objective. And when you believe that beauty is objective, And I think the simplest way to think about this is, well, what about God's opinion? You know, uh, ideally, I'd like to go at this from another angle, but seriously, if I make a movie or paint a painting, what does God think of that? Okay, maybe he looks favorably on it because I'm his child. And even when my child draws something poorly, it's like, I love this because it's something they made.
Yes.
At the same time, we would never just be content with that. We would want them to improve, and learn and grow and get better at that craft. So if we believe that beauty is objective, which I do, then it's something outside of myself. Beauty inspires. It speaks. Anything that we see speaks. God literally spoke this world into existence. It's constantly, everything says something. If I walk into a boardroom meeting and I'm wearing slacks and everyone else is in suits, I'm breaking this etiquette. But what I'm wearing says that I don't, value them or value my own, whatever the reasons for it are. I know I'm just kind of going off the cuff here, but your clothing speaks. It says something. When I am taking Emerald out on a date, I dress well because I'm trying to say something about, what I think of being in her company, but also it speaks about her. If I dress poorly and then we're in public, that reflects poorly on her because I'm the man that she's with, and vice versa. This should not be terribly controversial. So getting to,
let me ask you this.
Sure.
You're saying this shouldn't be controversial. Like, who decides what is well and what is not well?
So, this reminds me of the Euthyphro dilemma. Are you familiar with that?
Well, go ahead and explain it.
Yeah, so the Euthyphro dilemma, I believe it comes from a Greek play or story or something. Essentially, the Euthyphro dilemma is this question: is do the gods, is something good because the gods will it, or do the gods will it because it's good? And the dilemma there is that, well, if the gods will it because it's good, then there's actually like this goodness. There's this thing outside of the gods. The gods aren't actually really supreme because they're appealing to something outside of themselves. But if it's good because they say it, well, then we're just talking about a sheer imposition of willpower. It's just pure power. I don't think that anyone can look at that and actually think that it's just. Whereas the Christian answer to this question is not either of those things. It is the standard of goodness is bound up in the character of God himself. He is the standard. He is goodness. And so he is beauty. So when you say who sort of makes that decision on what is good or you said well.
Right, because you're talking about like dressing well and not dressing well.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that context doesn't play into that, right? So, the easiest example that a lot of people go to is, well, man shouldn't dress like a woman. And it's like, oh, well, what about kilts? It basically looks like a skirt. And it's like, yes, that is going to manifest in certain cultures in different ways. I think another great example is, I've heard of a culture. If I go down and tie my shoes and I put my Bible on the floor, most people here wouldn't think anything of that. I'm just tying my shoes.
Right.
But there is a culture. I don't know where it is, but I've been told about this. That putting the Bible on the floor is like, well, this is a value. This is the Holy Scriptures. Like it shouldn't be. It should be in a better. It shouldn't be placed on the floor. It should be in a place of esteem, ideally, right? And
no, yeah, and I know of people who will never, like, if they're stacking books, they'll never put their Bible. If there's a Bible there, it's always on top. So
Right.
I've heard
And
of that. Yeah.
so it's not always the particulars that I think are terribly important. And like I said, I'm just kind of reasoning through this as a layman, but, I may not know how to answer all those questions of taste and how the particulars play out in specific instances. Another good example is when it used to be in the United States, you would open up the door for a woman because you were trying to show her esteem.
Yeah.
She goes in first. But there are other cultures I've heard where the men go through first because the idea is I'm protecting them. If there's danger on the other side, I'm in front. It's a completely opposite custom, but they're getting at the same idea. The women are valuable and ought to be esteemed or protected. So I may not understand how to explain all that and how it plays out in particular instances, but I cannot think of any other alternative. The idea that beauty is merely subjective. Well, God has an opinion about everything. And his opinion is by definition objective, which means he's right, which means I want to have his opinion. It means there is an answer to whether something is beautiful or not. So getting back to the church building, when you talk about architecture and you think of something like brutalism, which is literally designed to make you feel small. It's an architectural style that these sort of big imposing buildings. I believe the FBI building, like at main headquarters, is built in this style, and it's just crushing. Like it's soul crushing being in this place. And you can look up studies where I don't have any of them handy, but you can find studies where people who work in buildings like this have a higher suicide rate. Like that's not an accident. The building is saying something spiritually. Whereas when you go to a cathedral or a beautiful church, yes, it is. You'll see these tall ceilings and such. They make you feel small, but the difference is that it's designed in such a way as to orient you towards maybe there's a better word, but a sort of transcendence. You are being pulled up into the heavenly, not crushed. But you don't go in there and then think a lot of yourself. You go in there and you think, wow, like this is majestic. I'm starting to think of, heavenly things. I mean, when I saw the Whitecaps of Colorado, my very first glimpse, like this is not an exaggeration. I looked at them and I was so awed that I was driven towards repentance. I was driven towards like, man, like, I'm not, it wasn't this, it's not like I had a step-by-step thought process that led me to this repentance. It was just the glory of it. And, my response to that couldn't be anything but thankfulness and awe and, wanting to turn away from things that pull me lower, that make me subhuman, as opposed to more human. So when I see this building and I see, the way the light works in it and the way the acoustics work, man, like brother, one of the things that hit Emerald and I so hard was when they first sang doxology. It's probably like the one thing in the church that everyone can do off the cuff, but it is beautiful, because everyone knows it well and they're singing full-throated and loud, but the building helps in that. It's not manipulation.
Yeah.
It's if we're understanding that part of what we're doing in church is joining this heavenly choir, well, you feel like it. And that's true. It is literally happening, even if we don't perceive it fully yet. So I hope that answers your question.
No, yeah, it does help, man. It does help. So what is your concern with a lot of I guess, the arts or architecture that we see that is new and modern?
So, I mentioned earlier that, just because a building is new doesn't
Right.
it's not inherently bad.
Correct.
But, and I'm sure that other people who are much more familiar with art history, could say a lot more here. I mean, I've listened to plenty of things along these lines, but, uh, I mentioned being more human as opposed to subhuman. And I don't want to use a specific example too much because, if people aren't familiar with him, it's not as helpful, although you could Google him. Uh, but you're familiar with Arthur Quan Lee?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I follow him on a lot of stuff. He's an interesting dude.
He's an interesting guy. Yeah, definitely. He's a character.
His political views are pretty solid.
That doesn't surprise me that you would say that. Either way,
his art is remarkable, though.
But that's the thing. That's what I was getting to. So when I say subhuman, when you look at the art that was done by the ancient Greeks, etc. There was this aspect about it. I mean, if you spend 5 minutes studying Greek pillars and how no one knows how they did it, it's so mathematically precise. And it's not merely just like a craftsmanship thing. I mean, the Romans came along later and they were like, wow, we built this amazing empire, but they were still looking up to the Greeks. It's like, wow, we can't do that. They were still astonished by these things. And you look at, I remember seeing an example once of this statue. It was a marble statue. And the person's arm was in a particular position. And there's a muscle that you can't really see unless your arm is in like a particular position and it's flexed. And this artist, this statue, you could see it on there, which means that they understood the human body. And I understand in that particular case, you're trying to do this realistic one-to-one. And it's objectively better art, I say in my opinion, but I believe it's true, than, postmodern stuff that we see nowadays with, like, I don't want to get too graphic, but, maybe a less graphic example, but like the famous banana that's just like duct taped to the wall. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I saw that.
I'm sorry. Like and I've talked with other Christians about this. Like maybe that's not the best example, but we like someone will just make a painting and it's just an off-white. And they're like, their sort of defense for this is like, well, you say that anybody can do that, but you didn't. And that's kind of the point. And I'm like, but, again, it's not that I necessarily have to have all this expertise, but I think that we're built to recognize beauty. Again, when I see the mountains, I'm just hit with it. It's so self-evident. And I think that God has designed the world in such a way that we can recognize these things. We can have a sense of beauty. And when I look at the banana or I look at the off-white, I'm sorry, it's just not as beautiful, or it's just ugly. But it's not as beautiful as the statues that I mentioned earlier. But the reason I brought up Arthur Quan Lee is he's a great example of doing something that's unique. And his drawings and stuff, they're not all like these one-to-one things. They're highly stylized. But right. I think that he's doing something kind of subversive where he is... I remember hearing someone else talk about this once, and I can't do it justice, but they were saying that what he is doing is something more along the lines of playing in the field that he's in. There's a reason that even the pagans like his stuff, but it is very clearly getting at this higher truth. again, it's self-evident. I just look at it and it's beautiful. And there are some pieces that I care for less than others. But I think anytime we get I think that, I look at that and I think that's a way to do it well, but it doesn't mean I can necessarily fully explain it. But I look at it. Did you happen to see, it was one of the Pixar movies, Soul?
No, I haven't seen that one, man.
Okay. Well, I was surprised by how much I did not care for that movie. And there are other reasons for that, and I won't go into all of it, but this character, when he, dies or whatever, and his soul goes to wherever it goes, all of the sort of attendants that are running the place are drawn in this sort of modern art style where they don't have like a defined form. And that gets back to this idea of, Platonic forms and accidents of things. I don't want to get into the philosophy and stuff too much because I'm very shallow on it myself. I consider myself shallow on it. But the idea is that there's the human, or forms of anything. But, let's take the human form, for example. There's this thing like humanness. And when you're deviating from that form, there's something wrong. Something has gone wrong. So humans have 2 arms and 2 legs, right? That doesn't mean that a person with only one arm is less human. It doesn't mean that a human with one arm, it's kind of strange because in one sense he is not any less human, but in another sense he is. Like he's missing something. It's sad because there's something that ought to be there. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're getting at.
Yeah. So, but whenever we are leaning more and more towards art that takes the forms of things and dissolves them, I think you get something that's uglier. And I think it's lying about the beauty of the human form.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Because I went and looked up the banana duct taped to the wall.
Yeah.
And you did not misrepresent it. Huh?
Some guy ate it, right?
Oh, I don't know. That'd be awesome.
I'm almost certain that happened.
And I just want to point out that is a fair, an honest, 100% honest representation of what it is. It's literally a banana duct taped basically to a wall.
Yeah, that's literally all it is.
One of them sold for $150,000.
Right.
And so, is there any situation where that could be considered good art?
I don't think so. I mean,
what if it's satire? And it's done to make fun of modern art.
But you wouldn't be taking that thing and then presenting it as beautiful. I think satire. I think satire or comedy is sort of a separate category, and I think that's another fascinating thing in and of itself. Comedy is incredibly powerful, and serves an amazing purpose. And I think we as Christians need to understand that better and take it more seriously. Yes. But that's a bit different. I wouldn't if my child.
I'm not going to pay $150,000 for a piece of art that's going to expire in 2 weeks.
I thought about that as well. What do you have to put a new banana each week? I don't know. But the thing is, part of the idea behind that is it's just meant to be shocking, and it's
shocking.
Well, it's depressing. Here's the thing: at this point, it's almost not shocking because it's all they do. But at the same time, it's like depressingly. There's nothing wrong with being temporal, but at the same time, as Christians, we want to look towards the eternal, right?
Yeah.
And in what way is your art participating in something eternal?
For sure.
That doesn't mean that it's going to exist in a context, just as we as humans exist in contexts and are members of people groups, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But again, getting back to sort of looking up and at the eternal things, the pagans who make modern art, they're not interested in those eternal things. Now, you might have an amazing artist, who's just by, I guess, common grace and because they're human, are able to do beautiful works of art.
Well, they're still made in the image of God.
Exactly. Yeah. But the thing is, the people who do this awful stuff, by and large, they don't believe in things like the image of God. They don't believe in sort of that intrinsic human value. They don't believe in eternal things, and their art, and this gets into sort of the slippery slope thing. I know we typically talk about that in terms of politics and stuff, but when I mention the slippery slope, I'm not saying that, well, because X happens, because X happens, Y will happen. But if you follow the logic of X, you will arrive at Y. And when you have people who believe this about reality and humans, their art will inevitably, if they follow that path, become degrading. And that's what we see. There was I can't remember what it's called, but Emerald, we had gotten into long conversations about this stuff. Emerald, who's my wife, by the way, she brought the attention. I think she might have been reading a book by Nancy Pearcey. I can't remember, but whatever she was reading mentioned this building of this, anti-theist or something. I'm not sure, where he built this sort of church that was, like an anti-theist church or something. I could be getting the details wrong here, but you go inside and there's pews, sort of. It's just these black benches, I think. And it's just 3 walls with 3 giant black squares. And Emerald, if I remember correctly, she showed me a picture and she started tearing up or something. It was so dark and depressing and sad. And I think in that moment she was recognizing the tragedy that had happened there. And there's this broken obelisk outside that I think it's supposed to be dedicated to Martin Luther King or something, but it's just abstract. It's totally arbitrary. It's ugly. And I believe that guy ended up committing suicide not long after that thing was finished building. And oh, great, yeah, public dollars funded that. Great. That's another tangent, I suppose. But but the thing is, these things, they matter. They actually matter. Our values and what we believe are going to end up being reflected in the things around us, but it's not a one-way street.
No, yeah, for sure.
Again, yeah, these things pour into us, and you can't be in Sodom and not be affected. And that's why when it's no longer used as a post office, but we have a post office in downtown Fort Collins, the old post office. I think it's a museum now, and it's this beautiful building. It's not gorgeous, but it's a pretty building, and it has. It's not a big black box. And it seems ridiculous to me that why would we abandon that for the big black box? And it was an intentional move, and we're worse for it. No one likes going in government buildings. Ever.
There's some other reasons for that, though.
Oh, that's true. But what I'm saying is they're not entirely disconnected.
No, yeah, that's fair.
You look at.
So, are you saying that government buildings are basically their design is boring and destructive because their goal is to break down the human being themselves to make them mindless, submissive drones?
So, yes, but it's interesting that you bring this up. I didn't, I just pulled up a quick few links before we even got set up. Were you familiar with a executive order that Trump at the time put out? It was I never know how to say this colloquially. referred to as the Make Federal Buildings Beautiful Again thing.
No, dude, he passed so many executive orders I lost track of them.
Yeah. Well, that was what it was, apparently, what it was, the official title was the Promoting Beautiful Federal Civic Architecture Executive Order. Biden overturned it, but my understanding is that, the federal government literally has, written somewhere that if there's a new federal building built, it should be built in the style of whatever is modern at the time. Okay. Whereas I don't know what was necessarily there beforehand, but essentially the executive order said, I think there's some official language here. It says, I don't want to take too much time looking this up, but this isn't from the executive order exactly, but I'll explain in a moment. It says to, quote, make federal buildings beautiful again via the establishment of a new President's Council on improving federal civic architecture and advocacy for styles of traditional architecture, including Gothic, Romanesque, Pueblo Revival, Spanish Colonial, and Mediterranean, that so-and-so feels are endemic to the United States. And these are architectural styles that, you look at the Capitol building. It's in one of those type of styles. And guess what? Say what you will, it's a pretty beautiful building. The White House is not an aesthetically gross building. Now, you could design the building such that it just kind of is supposed to invoke this sense of, imperialist might or something. I'm not a fan of that. But at the same time, you just look at Parliament, the British Parliament building. It's gorgeous. It's incredible. And, they have their own problems, but it's in spite of that beauty, and the reason I said that, I would get to this a little bit more is my understanding is that someone is proposing a bill in Congress, I guess, to essentially make that old Trump executive order essentially part of federal law. Now, I imagine it won't get through or whatever, but I would like it if it did, because I think if we started making beautiful buildings, it's one thing. It's just one thing, but it's something that we're sorely lacking right now is a good understanding of aesthetics. And I think when we're lost, it's a good habit to go back to what our fathers did.
Gotcha, man. So, I'm with you for the most part. I can't really disagree with anything you said for the most part. I appreciate that you did say just because something is new doesn't make it inherently bad, and just because something is old doesn't make it inherently good.
Not at all.
Right. Where a lot of people think everything that's new is bad and everything old is good.
No.
And we should be able to have.
We never want to just turn back the clock.
No, yeah, absolutely.
But when we're lost, and I think we're very clearly lost right now, and this just gets, I mentioned church history earlier, and tradition is really what you're kind of getting at there. It's a good guide. It's a helpful guide. And I think we ought to take the voice of the dead seriously because they've given us very much.
Right. We should learn from them instead of erase them.
Absolutely.
We don't have to agree with everything they did, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But we should learn from them and not erase them.
Right.
And so we should be able, there's no good reason, since all human beings are created in the image of God, there's no good reason as to why we, especially Christians, cannot have good and new, inspiring creativity.
Right.
And so we don't have to do everything that do all of our art and design like the old people, the old and dead before us, even though they did some remarkably, incredibly inspiring things.
Mm-hmm.
But the new things that we do should also be inspiring. And they shouldn't be a banana duct tape to a wall or just a bunch of grabbing a bunch of crayons and doing squiggly lines and putting it on the wall and calling it art.
Yeah.
That's for the refrigerator. And that's awesome for the refrigerator. But it shouldn't be in the museums with the best artists in the world.
Right. The idea that we need to recover a sense of. I mean, in a certain sense, we can't trust our gut right now because it's been so perverted, in many ways. And I always say our gut. I mean, on topics of beauty, politics, etc. We've been so inundated in bad thinking and ideology for a while now. But insofar as it's correct, I think we need to recover this sort of gut sense of like, wait a minute, no, that can't be right. That can't be right.
Yeah.
And just trust it. God put that there. The duct tape on the wall. If someone's ever like, well, I'm like, no. Like, this shouldn't be a conversation. Like, I'm assuming you're familiar with the Overton window.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Overton window, for those who aren't familiar, is just, it's the window of acceptable discourse. So, in polite society, there are some things you just, we want to, if you're a fan of free speech in this sort of pure
Yes.
sense,
Yes.
you want to hear everyone's voices so that the best ideas sort of bubble to the top and whatnot. But the reality is that we're humans. Not every idea can be taken seriously. Some ideas should just, they're out of hand. They're out of bounds. But that also goes to other things. And I would say like aesthetics, like, if someone, there is something to be said for, or if I'm an English teacher and someone turns in a paper and there's something to be said for like, I'm not even reading this, like, come back with something better. And we should look at the duct tape and the guy should be laughed out of the room. But unfortunately, we take everything seriously.
He collected, man. He sold for 3 pieces, roughly around $150,000 each. Like I said, I looked it up while we were talking. I want to believe that it was satire and that he went to the bank like laughing.
I think these people are cynics.
Don't think that happened, and that kind of bothers me. But man, not even just like, so like, I think the issue is not even just like the lack of creativity, right? It's not just lack of creativity.
That's a moral problem too.
It is that. Where I was going with this though is like, cause we talked some about architecture and, what we build today. Not only does a lot of it, not all of it, not only does a lot of it lack creativity, but it also like lacks durability.
No, that's an interesting point. We talk about form and function, right? And there is something to the idea of sometimes you just, for various reasons, maybe you have to prioritize function. But the form informs the function, And I think another thing too, you mentioned durability. I think that's an easy example, but there's also something to be said for like, well, I might look at a church and I would say, hey, this is beautiful. It's got the form right. And someone else might argue, yeah, but maybe the function isn't so good because you can't do X, Y, and Z, and I like these conveniences, etc. Well, we very rarely consider, what if you're wrong about those things? Maybe those things that you think of are conveniences are actually crutches, or what if they're bad for you? When you have, and I remember rooms like this at Bethel Baptist Church, like this mega church that I went to for a while when I was a young kid. There were plenty of sort of multi-purpose rooms, but they end up being bad rooms for any particular purpose. Whereas we look at the sanctuary, it is for worship, and it's great for that. It may not be great for holding a potluck, but that's not what it's for. It's for something. And architecture ought to be for something. So, but when it's doing that well, and it's being done by real craftsmen, it actually does end up working. You mentioned durability. Our houses, I know one of the big ones they talk about these days is wood. We all have these fast growing trees and whatnot that we plant for the 2x4 used to be actually an actual 2x4. We're literally building with a weaker skeleton.
Yeah.
We don't own a home or anything, but man, when we get there, like, I'm going to really value an older building if it'll work for us, because it's going to be standing in another 50 years probably.
And oddly enough, they're tend to cost less too.
I would assume so,
Yeah.
because, our modern sensibilities tell us we want certain things. And, like anything, when you're going against the grain, you're going to make sacrifices. Maybe we won't have central air again. But
well, if it was an old house, it might not be as important because it was built different.
That's also true.
It was built to cater to the flow of the wind and the breeze and during the day and that kind of thing, and where the sun rises, where the sun sets, and et cetera, et cetera. So it might not be as important.
I was so infused. Both my wife and I mentioned this. I mentioned our babysitter earlier. She, when we came back from our 5th anniversary, we, I don't know how we. Usually, I'm the one who, like, oh gosh, like, Paul, let him leave. You just keep talking. I love having conversations with people, but it was kind of the other way around. I was like, I really enjoy your company. You're very comfortable. It was a young girl, but very comfortable talking with adults, and seemed to actually have a head on her shoulders and everything else. But she mentioned something like, "Yeah, we don't even have front porches anymore." And I was like, Emerald and I had a conversation about that, like, literally the day before. And so I'm like, maybe there's hope. some of the youth realize what's really going on and what's really valuable. And
honestly, man,
but even the porch, like, the idea was that it was outward facing towards the community, but it invites people in and gives a platform for community. And now we're all just stuck in our houses. I'm someone who's, like, super guilty of a lot of this stuff.
Well, not only
but it's hard when you're going against the grain.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, man, it's like, not only do people just like hang out in their houses, but most people, if they do have a patio and a porch, it's in their backyard. It's closed off.
That's kind of what we have.
As opposed to, that's also, like, that's the way, like, which is not your fault necessarily.
Yeah.
It's the way the house that was available to you at the time was designed.
Right.
But if they do have a porch or patio, it's in the backyard, closed off with everybody else, which doesn't help for building community.
Right.
As opposed to being in the front.
And I mentioned making sacrifices, but also, you ask, like, how do we get out of this? And it's like, well, we didn't get ourselves here overnight. We're not going to get ourselves out overnight. But you have to be that much more intentional. Okay, well, it would be great if I had maybe a front and back and et cetera, et cetera. But you know what? Let me use the space that I do have, even if it's kind of a, more of a hassle to get around the other side of the house like that. I haven't taken advantage of that as much as I could have, and then that's a bit of a separate story. But, and everything that I've said here, I want to be, I want to say with some humility too. Like, I feel very strongly about these things, but that does not mean I've participated in the way that I should have either. I think music, for example, it's so important. It's so valuable. It's so great. But I don't listen to much music, and I don't play any instruments. And, for what it's worth, that wasn't cultivated in me. So,
right.
You have to make a decision between, well, where do I go from here? I want to be a well-rounded individual, but, do I spend that time getting rounded out in some other aspect and leave this behind? But that's one I struggle with a lot personally, is music, because I don't know. I don't go out of my way to listen to it. And I love listening to podcasts and all that kind of stuff, but at some point it can become noise.
Yeah.
I still to this day remember, I visited a Reformed Baptist church when I was first, really got saved and was looking. That's not entirely true, but whatever, it's close enough. And I was visiting this Reformed Baptist church, and right before they were about to start singing, everyone just, it was kind of a silent prayer, but it was like, at least for our modern sensibilities, like 20, 30 seconds of silence is an eternity. But the point was to quiet your heart for worship. And it worked.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like but many people would feel super uncomfortable with that. We don't know what to do with silence.
I think that requires like some like self-examination. Like, why is that?
I think we're constantly used to being distracted.
Yeah,
I think there's 100 different directions you could go with that. And again, that's not something I do amazing on, but every now and then I try to be intentional about, I don't have to play something while I'm driving the car. I can just open the window.
I like driving in silence, man.
Yeah.
I like driving in silence. I don't know why. But like usually, like sometimes I'll be, if I'm in the car with somebody, and like we just maybe, I don't know, they can't get their phone connected, or I can't get my phone connected. I'm like, we don't have to play anything, man. We can just drive.
Yeah.
And they're like, but okay, weirdo. And then about like 30 seconds in, 1 minute in, they're like, no, I can't do this.
Yeah. When my wife and I are driving, sometimes I'll usually, she'll usually put on something, but,
Yeah.
The conversation, very, very often we end up turning it quite low so that we can have a conversation and we're not talking over music. Definitely not something that we're doing to just fill the air.
Yeah. But like being in a corporate worship setting where you're all gathered there to do something together, whether it be a sermon, singing, praying, or something like that.
Yeah.
Being in a room with like however many people, 50 to 5,000, and 30 seconds of silence, that's powerful.
Well, it and again, it says something about, you think, and it was a small church, probably a little over 50 people or something. Sorry, my wife just...
Hi, Dad.
Yo, hey.
Just give me a plate of dinner.
Nice, man. So you were saying that the Reformed Baptist church you went to, like when you were a kid.
Oh no, not when I was visiting a Reformed Baptist church when I experienced that minute of silence or whatever.
Oh, okay.
I know I had earlier mentioned Bethel Baptist Church, which I think is like the largest church in Indiana or Northwest Indiana these days.
Okay.
Like it was big when I last went, but it's like only gotten bigger. But they I know when I was still up there, they even changed their name to Bethel because they didn't want the Baptist being like potentially divisive, which is like kind of crazy to think about because now I'm all like distinctions, more adjectives. Like I'm all about that because I don't think that they have to divide us, but that's a different conversation.
I used to be really big into that. Well, we don't need to have like denominations in our names. We probably shouldn't have denominations anyways, and all that kind of thing. All they are is divisive. They're all results of like fighting and pettiness and all those different kind of things. In all fairness, there's some truth to that.
I was about to say that's not, those critiques aren't necessarily incorrect, but you also have to think about what the alternative is.
Right. And some of them are good critiques, some of them are bad.
Sure.
This and that kind of thing. But I think somewhere over the past few years, I've kind of I think I've leaned into the area as to where maybe you should spend time redeeming the name that you deem that's possibly might be divisive, right? It's like maybe like Baptist Church is divisive. Well, like maybe we can redeem the name of your community, and maybe it's not divisive. For example, man,
I was going to say
I can see your face.
No, I'm super interested. I'm not doubting what you're saying. I need something.
I know like a small town with a Baptist church that planted 2 other Baptist churches based off of petty fights.
Sure.
Like colors of the carpet. They got into a pissing contest over that. And like, fine, we're going to start another church on this side of town. And then there was another one where they fought over, it might have been like pews or chairs.
Sure.
And like, all right, fine. boom, start another Baptist church in town. And so in that town, it's a small town, a Baptist church is a tainted name.
That's unfortunate.
Because everybody knows everybody's business because everybody's a gossip busybody. And so I'm like, well, that's the case. One, I can probably see why you wouldn't want Baptist in your name if you're affiliated with a Baptist convention or whatever. But also I'm like, well, Baptist doesn't have to be a cuss word. So maybe it might be worth doing some work to where maybe we can redeem the name in that context.
I think that may be the only way out in some ways, in some situations. This reminds me a little bit of my brother knew someone in like a campus ministry at one point, and he was like super, I guess he got saved, but there's a lot of problems with whatever the church he was in at the time, and he was like coming out hard against the Baptist church. And this is right when I started learning more about Reformed theology and et cetera. Yeah. And I was like, wait a minute, dude. Like, I didn't know the guy, but when he was telling me about this, my brother, that is, I was like, wait a minute, like he's a Baptist. Like, does he not realize that? Like, he can have critiques of whatever organization, but it's interesting how we can get so animated about things that I say don't know very much about, but if churches are splitting, like, these pastors should know better. But again, another conversation.
Well, like, you've been in Baptist churches, so you might understand that a lot of times in a lot of Baptist churches, it's not the pastor's a figurehead.
That's true. I was too young to maybe recognize some of these things. Okay, gotcha. I know I mentioned Bethel Baptist earlier, and that was definitely a case. I think the guy still is like lead pastor or whatever. Can't remember his name, but he definitely had real powerful sense of charisma, etc. He could throw his weight around. But you're right. My understanding is that a lot of smaller Baptist churches, the pastor's essentially just like almost an employee of like the church board or whatever. And
he's there to preach at people on Sunday, and then the deacons and 37 different committees make all the decisions.
Yeah. And I can't. Well, I don't actually have like a super hard and fast belief on what a church's ecclesiastical structure should be.
Right.
My understanding is that this is a distinction between like Presbyterians and the Anglicans, for example. I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is that the Presbyterians do have like, church government is supposed to be set up in this particular way, and the Anglicans are more like, and I believe this is the same with a lot of different government, even like civil government. I don't think that there's necessarily like always this single ideal situation or a government structure that works best for a community. I think that culture is going to play a big part into that. And I know this is really getting into kind of minutia, but, well, let's say we believe in like balances, weights and balances, checks and balances. There you go. Well, the way that we might go about designing those checks and balances may get at the same end, but it may not look exactly the same, and that's okay. So the idea of like sort of a church board that makes decisions and stuff, like, okay, you guys might call them bishops, you guys might call them, priests, and just to be clear, the Anglican understanding of the priest is not the same as like the Roman Catholic understanding.
No, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so there.
You mind sharing your story, your testimony?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to get into this late.
I know, right? Normally I do at the beginning, man, but I threw myself a curveball.
That's fine. I'll try to keep it short because, man, like, it's not that I love talking about myself exactly. I do love talking and digging into stuff, but.
Hey, I got as much time as you got, man.
Sure. Well, where to start? So I grew up in sort of a nominal Christian household in Indiana.
Okay.
I certainly would have a lot of things to critique, but I take the command to honor your father and mother very seriously. And so even though I would have a lot of, critiques of, maybe ways that I was raised or things that I wish they did or didn't do, etc., um, I don't want to center that, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
but
no, that's cool.
But I would certainly say that my mom is a believer, and she definitely raised us with a sort of a good moral sense. One of the things that was kind of a refrain for her was, I'm trying to remember exactly how it went, but there's a big emphasis on character, and your character, when you compromise your character, you're compromising on your relationship with God. And so it's important to keep, not in like this legalistic sense at all, but like your character actually matters. And so I was definitely didn't get into much trouble as a kid for the most part. It's kind of a mama's boy, and it was enough punishment oftentimes just to disappoint her. But no, I mean, I remember going to church, sometimes more consistently than others. My mom was even part of like the choir for a bit, and I would go and, help run the machine, the CD player or whatever it was at the time to play songs. And I really enjoyed that. I would just play Pokemon or whatever and do that. But, eventually we stopped going, and my parents eventually got divorced. And I'm sure that played, some part in our attendance, stopped going. And, eventually she got remarried. We moved to San Antonio, and I always, I would have always professed to be a Christian, that I, believed in God, but when my eyes were finally opened, I realized, it was just, I don't know how to describe it. Like, and I've heard other people give a very similar account, so I don't feel like it's terribly unique. But it's like, yeah, I believed it, but I didn't live out that reality at all. Like, I don't think if I believe in Jesus, I don't think I would have been lying. But at the same time, do you really know who Jesus is, etc. And like, I remember thinking like, oh, there's God, and then there's Christ, and then there's Antichrist, and they're like on the same level. It's just very, very, I don't know where I got that from. All that said, after moving to San Antonio, got into playing Street Fighter and stuff, and met who I would now consider, for many years now, probably my closest friend. And, similar story maybe to some extent, but he was, living with his fiance for some time. And, in retrospect, I found out what happened, that he went to like a movie and was just overcome with conviction and guilt over, I'm not doing the right thing. I'm not following God like I'm supposed to, etc. And he sort of dropped off the map almost. And I found out later that he was essentially going back to like a house church that he was acquainted with for a short time. And he eventually kind of invited me over, and I was just stunned by how warm the reception was. And about the same time, my brother was also going to this same campus ministry that I mentioned earlier at UTSA. And he went, very charismatic and such. He's definitely not, it's not where he's at now. But he went on their big mission, I don't know what you call it, retreat or something, but it was called SALT. But he came back and he was a different person. Like, some people just have these sort of radical transformations, and I don't think that's the norm, but that's what happened with him. And I was so floored by it. It actually created a lot of tension in our relationship. He was probably a little bit legalistic, because he was just so on fire and wanted to root out sin, etc. But, I realized, God he was working through all of that. And eventually I remember going to Whataburger down the street like I had done 100 times. And I'm sitting in the parking lot and I realized this is true. Like, God actually exists. The Bible is the word of God. This is his Christ, etc. And I remember this very distinct moment where I was like, well, if all of that's true, then he makes certain demands on me and makes certain demands on my life. And I guess I need to follow him now. Like, it really was, I couldn't tell you the moment that I was saved, so to speak, but there was definitely a before and after. And, I go to my brother and I apologize for the jerk that I had been. I did eventually start going to that same house church that my friend mentioned, or that my friend was going to. And I'll spare you the details there. It's a very long story. I even ended up living there for a bit. I mentioned that earlier, but, had a lot of problems that a lot of house churches do, and I couldn't stay there in good conscience. My theology was reforming at that time as well, and one of the big things for me was church discipline and a multiplicity of elders. And that wasn't there. So, I ended up leaving. My brother also was kind of wanting to step away from the Assemblies of God church that he was at the time, just kind of coincidentally, or a God thing. And, during that time where we were kind of going through our separate journeys, we were in an apartment together before where we had both moved out, and we ended up moving back in together essentially. And it was, man, for as rough as things were between us in a certain way, the Reformed theology stuff was really rubbing him the wrong way for a bit as well. And, it was kind of wild that, as we both were, oh, okay, maybe we'll move back in together or whatever. Like, he was basically there, he was like, yeah, like, I believe all that stuff and I want to find a better church for the same reasons you do, etc. And we ended up finding, I was looking for Reformed Baptist churches, and I mentioned this before, but the first one I visited was the one that looked like it was the most solid and had the least cool website, which is completely against everything I was saying a minute ago. And to be fair, maybe that was more of a utility thing, because I was like, well, if they're so, maybe they don't realize that, what I would say now is, like, maybe they don't realize that thing about beauty, but I was so concerned with the purity of doctrine, etc. I went there, I visited a couple times. It was nice, but at the time I was listening to a ton of James White, Reformed Baptist preacher.
And wear you out, man.
Man, I could go on for a while about that. I was like all about his stuff for a while, and to this day, I'm incredibly thankful for how much I learned. But
of course,
kind of can't stand the guy now.
But no, dude, I was a huge Mark Driscoll guy for like 10 years now.
Yeah, no, I still find that fascinating. But by the time I learned about him, he had been disgraced already.
Oh, seriously? Oh, dang.
So a lot of that went straight over my head. It's interesting to hear everyone talk about it in like such, people still have really charged emotions about a lot of stuff with Mars Hill and whatnot. But I just look at it and it's like reading a history book. But it happened 5 minutes ago. Aside, I cannot believe that guy still has a platform. Like, And it's like a problem. Like people are listen. I don't get it either way. All that said, I mentioned James White because when we were going to that Reformed Baptist church, like it reminded me a lot of what his church is probably like. The one at the time, at least. Now he's with the Apologia church guys. But I was also eventually, I found his stuff through listening to Apologia Radio, which my older brother had recommended. And when I found Redemption Hill, it was the last church that we were going to visit. My mind was pretty well made up that we were going to go to that other one. And turns out Mike wasn't even preaching that week. It was somebody else. I just assumed he was the head pastor or whatever. And I was like, okay, it's good, whatever. But I kind of was walking out and had sort of made up my mind. And it's just crazy how much changes on these small things. Mike ran out. And, hey, I noticed you guys are new, just, wanted to talk to you, whatever. And over the course of that conversation, he had agreed to meet me and my brother for lunch to answer questions and such. And we did that, and we went back to visit one more time and hear him preach, and I was just so blown away by his preaching. And I was like, maybe it's too much of a leap for me to like do the whole James White-esque thing. This reminds me a little bit more of like maybe a Apologia Radio type of feel, like a little more loose, a little more contemporary, etc. And again, kind of sparing the details, but at the end of the day, I think that was the right decision. It's the one we made, and eternally grateful to Redemption Hill. I've been told before that I think that you're afforded sort of one major theological leap in your journey that you can make pretty quickly, because I think a lot of us get saved. We kind of just absorb whatever context we're in. Like I mentioned, that house church. Pretty charismatic and pretty a lot of, I don't know, kind of a weird combination of different things, because it was essentially just this dad preaching to his kids for the most part. And I mean, he had a large family, but his beliefs on things you would pretty neatly fall in here, but not here. So it was kind of a weird mishmash of things. But, I realized like, hey, like I think that was one of the big things of listening to James White that affected me, was encountering systematic theology, like actually thinking through scripture and trying to form a system, because I realized that I saw what the YOLO approach did, because that's kind of what it was. And sure, a bad system, you can always fall into all of us have a bad grid that we read scripture through, but you're still going to read it through some kind of grid, because there's no way that you can. It kind of goes back to relying on the wisdom of men before us who have done a lot of hard thinking about these things and fought for it tooth and nail, blood, sweat, and tears. And, I find that incredibly valuable, and I'm going to take it seriously. So, can't think of too much else to note. Eventually I wouldn't even call myself a Presbyterian now exactly, but, now I attend a Presbyterian church, so my theology has definitely developed a little bit since then, but it's definitely more of a...
like Presbyterian beta mode, not fully developed?
I wouldn't even say that. If I had, if you had to force me to make a decision, I would probably land something closer to Anglican, I think.
All right.
And I did look for Anglican churches here, but they're all liberal. You make the choice that you can. So I would be comfortable enough calling myself a Presbyterian in the sense that I do submit to a presbytery, etc. But, I'm not jealous for that title, I guess. It's in this case, I mean, don't get me wrong, the convictions are there. I mean, it lines up quite a lot, but part of it is circumstantial as well. So, but
So I think
the
one
point
thing
is that
that's
was more of a
go ahead.
slow burn, whereas when
Yeah.
I moved to Redemption Hill, I'm looking for something quite different.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think one thing that's interesting, man, and I think that you kind of communicated pretty well as you're talking about like that journey
yeah.
is
And that was over the course of years.
yeah.
I kind of I was at Redemption Hill for 4 years, I think.
Yeah.
About.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. Met
But,
Emerald there, so
it's kind of a big deal.
yeah, kind of a big deal.
But like I think as you're talking about like how you went to the house church and then
Yes.
Redemption Hill and that kind of thing. I think what's kind of cool about it is like the house church you probably wouldn't go to like today.
Not at all.
Because like you're not charismatic. You're apparently Anglican. And
if you forced me to make a decision, and the reason for that is I find myself having a more probably leaning more towards an efficacious view of the sacraments than Presbyterians do. I'm more comfortable saying, I'm very open to the question of like baptismal regeneration, for example, along, but it's not something I've dove into, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. But like I think so. Like one of the things like I think I picked up kind of from what you're talking about is like so like you go like to the house church, right?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't go there today, but I think what's cool is like it seems like you have like an awareness about like how God was taking care of you while you were there, and
Absolutely.
there was experiences that you have there that you see that were important and like kind of like important and vital for you to have experienced while you were there, while God was caring for you and He was pruning you and He was molding you there for that season, right?
Yeah.
Especially like when you talk about like how the house church, like everybody's really welcoming, everybody's inviting.
Oh yeah.
Inviting. There's a hospitality. There's a love for like brothers and sisters there, and like that stuff matters.
Absolutely.
And then like your theology starts to grow and develop. There's these convictions that are important to you, and then like you end up at Redemption Hill, which is obviously not a charismatic church. It's a phenomenal church. But
still
like
love it.
you get to like exactly, you get to grow and develop your theology there, and God is still taking care of you. He is still pruning you and watching over you and caring for you. And He sends you up to Colorado, and y'all have found like a Presbyterian church, which is different from Redemption Hill.
Definitely
Doesn't make it any better or any worse. And He's still doing like the exact same thing that He's doing there. And so like, I think that's kind of important, man, is because like sometimes we have a tendency to look at our past and just kind of like shake our head and we're like, what was I thinking? That was so stupid that I was at that place or I thought that or believed that. But like, even like in those places that are past, man, like those places still play vital roles that God is working through as He's taking care of us and pruning us and molding us into what He wants us to be.
right.
And so I think that's pretty awesome.
And sin is unfortunately, but operating through all of that, because you mentioned, as I'm listening to that, there's so many, I think back to the house church, a lot of mistakes that I made, a lot of things that I have said or have not said. That relationship is not, even to this day, really like healed well. And maybe I have something to how do I put it? Maybe I still have something to apologize for, my own mistakes, etc. But even like just me coming to Texas in the first place, I won't get into specifics, but part of that was due to someone having some fling, and then oh, I know she's pregnant, but the family won't, tell me, and they don't want me around. So I left, and the consequences of that terrible situation is a key part of how I ended up in Texas, because of long lost relationships that were, reformed. And, you know, uh, that's just one example of how, we stumble our way towards Christ. And it's impossible not to see him working through all this. So even when we first moved here, and it was incredibly difficult, again, I'll spare the details. But when we first moved here, no question, probably even more than this, but no question, at least the first 6 to 9 months were the hardest time of both of our lives. It was extraordinarily difficult. But I've always said, that God clearly has us here for a reason. I struggle with regret as far as, I say struggle, that's even a strong word, but I wonder, like, did I make the best decision to come up here? Did I make the right decision? But regardless, it's the one that we made. It's the one that God laid out for us. And, you go from there. And that's a comforting thought.
No, yeah, absolutely.
I don't stay up at night wondering if I've made the right decision. And there's some obvious things too. My daughter is much more easily able to get certain therapy up here than she probably would in Texas. And it seems to be doing really well for her. And if that's literally the only reason, so to speak, and I know it's not, but if that was even the only reason that we're here, I could pour my entire life into that little girl, and it would be worth it. And I was even talking to Emerald about this last night, but there's many things in which, if we obey God, we get to see certain fruits in this life, and that is a joy, and it's a gift. But we're not guaranteed much of that. And, I think there's a lot of very good, worthwhile things that we could be doing that we might not ever necessarily see the fruit of because of providence. And, does that mean some tearful nights sometimes? For sure. But, but never a sense of hopelessness. Not even close. So,
I think there's a lot of wisdom, man. There's a lot of wisdom when we stop worrying and stressing about whether or not we think we made the right decision, and just in the midst of that, just learn to trust and rest, knowing that God is sovereign over all things. And so, like, we can worry about whether or not we made the right decision or not. That's not the best way to go about it. But like in the midst of like when we step forward in something, like God is sovereign, God is faithful, all the time, even when we're not.
I mean, I've asked I haven't in some time, so now maybe is a good time, but there have been a number of moments in my life where I have, just sort of like turned around and looked back, again, not necessarily in a regretful sense or anything, but, just take a minute to ask the question, has he failed to uphold a single promise? And it's like, it's not even a question. He absolutely has not. Like, even at its hardest, like, and I'm not just saying that because my theology dictates so, like, I just, it is impossible not to, he's literally goodness. Like, I can't bring myself to be anything but thankful when I take the second to sit down and contemplate that for even a moment. So it's, and when I do this, I often start thinking about, the beatific vision, seeing Christ as he is, just looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I can, like I said what I said a moment ago, because like I can relate in a sense to like making big decisions on things.
Sure.
And like when we moved to San Antonio, like I talked to Emily about it, and she says more or less, she like, if that's what you say that we need, if that's what you say that we need to do, then we'll do. Then let's go.
And I think as husbands, that's like, there's another level to that. Like, oh my gosh, like I uprooted Emerald from her family, her home.
Yeah.
Like, sure, she's lived in other places, but this is where she's been rooted, and she's just following me.
Yeah, she's like, I'll go to Colorado with you.
Yeah. That's
big, man.
That's a heavy thing, especially when she suffers for it. You're in this together, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm just all that to say.
No,
I get it,
with you, man. I'm with you.
I get it.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. But like, I think so. Like, while I relate to that, at the same time, I know, but there's still like, just because you know something to be true, that doesn't mean you don't struggle to believe it at times, right?
Absolutely.
And so, like, God made you God. Like, God made you a husband. God made you a husband. God made you a father. God made you like you're the head of the household while you submit to Him.
Right.
And so, like, we need to trust that God knows what He's doing. Right? Because He's faithful.
That's something I've come back to over and over lately. When things have gotten difficult, it's maybe it's this sort of male orientation towards like fixing things. But there is very much, it's, when something's out of your hands, there really is very little you can do about it outside of pray. And I need to keep that in mind more, just, this is true generally, about doing the right thing. I can't think of a single time in my life where I made what I knew was the morally right decision and regretted it, no matter how painful it was. Just no question, it was worth it. And it's our sin that tells us, well, if you know that, why do you keep doing, wrong things? That's our condition. But at the same time, never, when I actually take a minute aside to pray, am I like, oh, like, wish I didn't do that. Like, that took more time out of my day than I'd prefer. And the same could be said for reading the Word. I can read so many true words, so many amazingly true words, but when I read Scripture, it literally is the word of life, and it feeds you in a different way. Even if you're just reading about some so far removed Old Testament guy, you forgot their name and who they're related to, but you know that this is just the words of life, and there's something I can't explain about that.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Like that's kind of like, it's a good point, but it also one that makes you chuckle. Like, I've never prayed or I've never read the Bible, and then like walked away from that like, man, I really wish I would have spent more time
and
scrolling through reels and stories on the internet.
Well, and I don't do so much of that, but I'm a big gamer, right? And there have been certain times where I'm like, why did I stay up so late? Or why, like, that's so, or I definitely get that sometimes, like, I like listening to political stuff, but there was a time there where I stopped listening for a few months straight, and I'm like, wow, I am in so much worse a situation because I didn't keep this, fire hose of, all the worst news of the day, just pumped into my veins. Like, there's something about being in touch with things and whatnot, but like, It should be intentional. Whatever. I still listen to more of it than I should. So
yeah, I think finding balance is a lifelong thing, man.
Yeah,
for sure. Man, we didn't get into everything I wanted to, man. So maybe we can do this a second time.
I'd love to.
Yeah,
I almost feel bad because this is definitely on the longer end. And I don't know that you've had a repeat guest yet. I would. I don't know. You did give me more accolades than anyone else.
But we'll have to do it again, man, for sure. Because I want to talk to you more about like work and career and stuff.
No, that's a bit interesting.
Because I think there's more to that probably than I think you might think that there might be.
No, well, that's why I say it's interesting, because in my own mind, I imagine that as a shorter conversation, but it seems like that's something you're really interested in. And I know obviously you're into you are an entrepreneur, etc. And I am most certainly not. But
maybe someday.
Yeah. Maybe. Who knows? But I'm down to talk no matter what, man.
Awesome. I appreciate it, man. And thanks everybody for joining us. If you enjoy the conversation, like we said at the beginning, don't forget to like the video. Please subscribe, click the bell, and any comments or questions you have, don't hesitate to drop them below. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.